So we are back, and it is my great pleasure to introduce and to bring in somebody that's been a really important partner and friend to Render. In fact, well, let me bring in Raj, and we'll talk about our shared history. So Raj, are you there? We have you on. There you are. So good to see you. Thank you for joining RenderCon. Wish you were here, but having you on the big screen it's been great. It's great to see you. You know, it's funny. I was just about to share that the very first time that I think really Render was put on the map was when I did Breakpoint in 21. I remember that first talk, and it went great. It was right around the time that we were thinking of moving to Solana, and of course we made that transition, and it's been amazing ever since. But I got to know you a little bit from that point, and we just shared a lot of stuff. I mean, just a love of the metaverse, that all the things that we wanted to see in the world, and I just felt that like there's just a great connection there, and I love what you're doing, and I think Solana's been just an incredible journey, and so I'd love to hear about that, and thank you for building the foundation that we run on.
Yeah, and thanks, Jules, for being such a visionary and bringing such incredible talent to the network. I think that was really always the vision for Solana. For those who don't know, Solana is the first and really kind of the pioneer of high throughput blockchains. We started in 2017 when CryptoKitties brought Ethereum to its knees. So we saw in the thousands of users that people were having lots of fun with crypto, but the scalability, the throughput, the latency was just not there. So I kind of think of it like, what if ChatGPT came out and every prompt took 30 minutes to get an answer back? That's how it felt in 2017. There was something special, but the experience wasn't magical because it wasn't performant. So long story short, and happy to get into details however you like, but we really cracked that problem. But that block space that is performant and high throughput and low latency is really only as good as what people make out of it. And yeah. I think it's just been a real joy to see Render get built on top and have this be the accounting layer for the Render token and for all the creators that make such amazing things using Render.
Yeah, and thank you. And I think one of the great insights I'd love to explore is, I mean, Solana has been ascended. I mean, I think that, when I remember when we were first getting to know each other, there was, it was a lot more of a contentious thing of whether Solana is going to be a useful alternative to ETH for like NFTs and things like that. And I think you guys proved that out. And also, Tolly, Raj's co-founder, is amazing. I mean, an incredible technical mind, so impressive. But I'd love you to speak to the future that you see for Solana, for the blockchain in general, for crypto in general, because I mean, I think you're just at the heart of that. And I'm sure the audience would love to get your insights on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the common theme from market cycle to market cycle, and I think everyone here, even if you're not deeply embedded in crypto, you know that crypto is very cyclical. It's dead, and then it's taking over the world, and then it's dead again, and then it's taking over the world again. And I think what we tend to see in those big swings is there is a trend up and to the right of new users discovering this idea of assets that they control, that no one else can take from them, that they can transfer permissionlessly. And that intuitive sense of what a digital asset and ownership looks like is just sort of spreading slowly over time. It feels like slow motion from the inside, but the adoption curve looks a lot like the early internet. And I think we kind of look at the state of the industry and its penetration as being somewhere in the late 90s of the internet and right on the verge of that .com boom. And, obviously a lot of noise in the .com boom and there's a lot of noise in crypto right now. I'm sure there will be plenty more to come. But what we do see is, finance getting rebuilt at its core, the payment mechanisms, the currencies, dollar-backed assets, stable coins that are really useful and configurable in traditional, really boring financial instruments, borrowing and lending and derivatives and things like that. And then we see on the, almost this completely opposite end of the spectrum, we see people just creating. And So the NFT market is really alive and well, but we see these ebbs and flows where when the finance part is really burning hot, that's what makes it into the big headlines. That's what goes viral. You see these, multi-billion-dollar market caps and asset outcomes. You see millions of people getting onboarded. And then there's a lot of people building in the background more quietly for the next big cycle for their vertical. And now what's cool is we don't just see this happening in finance and digital art and collectibles. We see it in things like infrastructure networks, of which Render is one of them. I would think of it as like a virtual infrastructure network. Yeah. There are also physical infrastructure networks getting built out, like Helium, where instead of renting out excess GPU capacity like Render does, there are people all over the world renting out extra bandwidth capacity, and they're together forming a mesh 5G network that's actually free to use. It started out by undercutting the competition, and then they actually shifted to a free model. So there's now today a 5G network that's running off the back of a distributed workforce, using token incentives and accounting for value movement and value creation on this distributed ledger, and that's called Helium. The same thing is happening with Hivemapper. There are dash cams capturing 4K footage. Truck drivers, taxi drivers are in a distributed way feeding into a new mapping system that's actually remapped about 40% of the world's roads in less than 2 years, with 1/100th or 1/1000th of the capital that it took for Google to create a fleet of cars to create Google Maps. So what we're seeing is this unbundling of products and services that can be rebuilt with much less capital intensively. But the products are actually better. They're cheaper, they're more efficient, they're better for users. And I think we see the same thing here with Render. Yeah. I think what's exciting is just we really have just barely scratched the surface for how new media, new IP can get financed, and how the value from creating that IP can be shared with audiences, with early curators, with early collectors. And I think we saw that happen in really primitive ways in the NFT boom in 2021, 2022. But I think there's generally just a feeling that the cycle is going to swing back, and we're going to see all the maturity of all those builders who've been, maturing their infrastructure and iterating based on learnings in the last cycle.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, Helium, I think, and the Solana community is great. I mean, when we were trying to build and move to both the BME model for Render, and also just move to Solana, I think that, we used, I think, their code base and their model, and it was great. I mean, it really helped accelerate a lot of what we did in the migration. And, I agree with all these things. And on the IP front, I remember, about 2 years ago, we did meet with Ari and talked about all these different things. I mean, there's such a hunger, I think, for independent financing of films. I mean, I was talking to a whole bunch of people, even trying to put together a panel. Didn't quite come together for this, but the idea of having content that's financed in this way, I mean, bringing back sort of independent filmmaking in a sustainable way at scale could be amazing. And truly, in some ways, that's also the promise of digital art as well. But I think there's a lot. I'm so glad you're focused on that, and I think there's a lot of opportunity there, for sure.
Yeah. A really fun and intuitive example for folks to check out here is this one project called Claynosaurs. They have these really delightful animations of dinosaurs that, it's a youth-focused IP. And the animations are just incredible. They make this wonderful viral content, and every dinosaur is a character that you can own through an NFT. And they've for years been building this, sort of cultish audience of mostly parents and children. My daughter actually still sleeps with her Claynosaurs blanket. And it's just wonderful because the audience really feels like they were there from the beginning. They're owners in this IP, they believed in it, and they actually have a stake in where it's going. And that's just one example of, how the sort of distribution and ownership and financing of some of this really delightful IP is getting turned on its head.
Yeah, no, it's, and I think my other question might be for you. I mean, Solana, in terms of obviously the breakthroughs you guys have done with transaction speed and other things. I mean, what do you see? Where do you see Solana in 5 years? Where do you see blockchain in 5 years? Like, what do you see on the sort of half-decade horizon that either keeps you up at night, or that you are focused on, or that you see as a big opportunity that comes at the other side of whatever the next few cycles might be?
Our North Star is, we want to continue focusing on this ledger layer. We call it the global state machine. It just tracks state of assets, account balances, and value transfers. And similar to the world economy, the more fluid and free the movement of value is, the less sand there is in the gears of commerce. And so for what that means for us is, we want to push the physical boundaries of how fast and cheap and scalable a distributed global consensus driven state machine can be. And we want to basically always be fighting against the speed of light. How long does it take for messages to get around the earth and for global consensus to be achieved? So right now we're at sub 400 millisecond block times. The network has been stress tested up to tens of thousands of transactions per second, which is around the throughput of Visa at its max capacity. And we want the performance of this underlying layer that powers so many experiences like Render to track something like Moore's Law. We want to double in performance every year or two. And the reason for that is, when we started in 2017 and told people we were targeting 50,000 transactions per second, we got laughed out of the room. They said, who would ever possibly use that much capacity? Right now we're at like 5 transactions per second for the whole industry. And, to me, that just reminded me of when my brother held up a USB stick with 1 megabyte on it, and he was like, "This is all you're ever going to need. It's in your pocket. It can store every file we've ever created." And we were computer nerds. And next year it was double, and sure enough we had 5 or 10 of them filled up. So this capacity always gets filled, and we count on that. And the way we're doing that, just to be sort of brief about what's upcoming, is there's a new validator client called FireDancer that's rebuilding the entire software stack of Solana from the ground up, using the learnings of 7 years in production of the first validator client. And that's expected to increase throughput or reduce bottlenecks for increasing throughput to something like 500,000 to 1 million transactions per second. There's also a project called 00, where there are special switches routing fiber-only paths around the world for validators to communicate with one another, and that also reduces latency. So, any project that increases bandwidth or reduces latency is prioritized in the roadmap and relentlessly executed against. And the joy that we get to see out of it is we're just constantly surprised by what new use cases and user behaviors and funding models and great IP and applications get built using that raw material of block space.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I also figured I'd ask, because I mean, everything in the crypto space, it feels like it should be borderless, it should be non-connected to nation states, but a lot of policies, I mean, here in the US, right, we just had a new administration, things change. Like, how does the effect of a new administration change anything in your outlook for Solana, or even just in the crypto space in general, beyond just Gensler, I guess, not being there and all that? I mean, how does that play into how you see the next year or two for you guys, coming together, or what does it change for you, if anything?
Yeah, the expectation was that policy in the US and the regulatory environment would change and adapt to be more friendly to crypto, because I think it couldn't have been more the opposite in the last 4 years. And I think what we've been surprised by is just the pace and the quickness that there's been a massive turnaround, to the point that things like stablecoins are now considered a matter of national security. What they do is they extend the reach of the US dollar to economies and wallets that don't have access to US dollars, that would have to go through lots of pain, friction, and paperwork to get exposure to US dollars, much less something like US treasuries. I, being honest, we didn't expect that this would happen when we were getting started in 2017. But I think what we're seeing is that there's a lot of change in geopolitical sort of dynamics, and a lot of that has to do with currency dominance. A lot of it has to do with the idea of sort of winning in not just AI, but also in crypto, to create an environment where more innovation comes from the West than the East. So, in a way, the competition amongst nation states for being the home of crypto has really accelerated the environment in the US. And what that means for us is we're just really excited because we're from the US. We were born here, we were raised here, our parents immigrated here, and we're really excited for folks who have built some of the greatest products on the internet over the past 10 to 20 years to be coming into crypto. And that's exactly what's happening, right? What I've seen is that there was a lot of hesitation around launching crypto products, and for good reason. There was things like Operation Choke Point 2.0, where banks were basically coerced into dropping any clients that had any business to do with crypto, and that is completely gone now. Banks are actually getting more clarity on what it looks like to custody digital assets on behalf of clients. And then you mentioned it, but honestly, the change in the SEC and the regulatory environment has been a big boon. Things like, let's say, if Claynosaurs wants to share revenue from a feature film back to its earliest collectors, and some of them were kids when they bought those NFTs, and then maybe as they go into adolescence, the fact that they spotted something really early and believed in it might help pay for their college. Like, it sounds very sentimental, but these stories can happen now because it is objectively a little silly to treat something like digital collectibles differently than you treat watches or any other collectibles that can appreciate in value if you're a tastemaker, and if you make the right bet at the right time, and if you support somebody who has a really great ability in their craft. And so I think there are going to be a lot of really amazing stories of wealth and value just being shared earlier to people who believe in something and take a stake in it.
Yeah, and I think that, I had people on a little bit earlier, and he was making a similar point, which is that, the idea of art being physical or digital, I mean, it's something that, from his perspective, obviously, art should be the artist's intent and all those things. And I think the world is changing more to adapt to that. I mean, his early success blew up a lot of the attention around this, but I agree with you. And I think that there is, I mean, listen, if I still had, some of my early comic books, those things actually were worth a lot. I like Iron Man #1. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. And I think, we have about a minute and a half. I want to ask a technical question because, obviously with crypto, there's always a fear of like losing your keys and all these things happening that could go negative. Have you totally like been working on anything that's like for post-quantum stuff? I mean, there's just a lot of chat around, whenever we had quantum computers, I'm granted, maybe even breaking the blockchain wouldn't be the worst thing that would happen because there's so many things that go wrong. But have you guys looked into that, or are you working on it? What do you think of it? Because it is sort of a topic that bubbles up here and then, and I figured I'd just pick your brain on that for a bit.
Yeah, in the last year, pretty quickly after some of the breakthroughs in quantum computing, we saw, independent of Solana Labs or Solana Foundation, there were ecosystem projects that started building things like quantum resistant vaults for assets. And so, some of the mitigations are already coming into play. And it's from our estimate, it's going to take years for any real scale of these systems to play out, and there's a lot of time to do basic research. Not just on a solution that works, but what is the most future-proof solution for what encryption methods we should switch to. That's kind of always been the expectation in crypto, is that we're not always going to be depending on SHA-256. Solana uses SHA-256 for its hash function that underpins proof of history. SHA-256 is the same hash function that that underpins Bitcoin, but that's just one component that can be switched out.
Yeah, we are out of time, and it was such a pleasure to have you join us for RenderCon, and thank you for all your support, and it's a pleasure to be working with you and to doing great things on Solana. Thank you, Raj, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you.